Okay, so good morning, everybody who is joining us from American time zones. Good afternoon to everybody who's joining us from European and African time zones, and good evening to everyone from Asia. My name is Friedrich Lindenberg. I'm going to be welcoming you to this webinar today. I hope that everybody can see the screen all right or can hear me all right. If that's not the case, then please shout and we'll aim to fix it as soon as possible. This is a webinar on digital research tools for investigative reporters. We're going to talk about different opportunities that investigative reporters have in terms of finding and analyzing information using the web more efficiently and more effectively. It's the third in a series of webinars that are supported by the Dow Jones Foundation, to whom we're grateful for their support. And we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any comments, feedback, questions, then please put them on Twitter. We've got the hashtag ICFJDigital. That's ICFJDigital. And any questions you post there, we'll try and get back to you during the webinar. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic. Maybe before we get into the question of digital research tools, I can introduce myself very briefly. So my name is Friedrich Lindenberg, originally from Germany. Currently, I'm a Knight International Journalism Fellow with ICFJ, who've given me the fantastic opportunity to spend 1 year working with two organizations in African countries, Code for Africa and NCIR. I'm currently in Cape Town, South Africa. Maybe very briefly about what Code for Africa does. So Code for Africa tries to build civic technology, civic tools that help citizens use data in order to understand what's going on in their government and in their lives. NCIR, on the other hand, which stands for the African Network of Centers for Investigative Reporting, is a network of investigative news teams across African countries. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide these news teams with the type of tools, training, capabilities that they need to really do the best investigative journalism that they can do. This also means that if any of you are interested in working together, especially if you're coming from African countries and you'd like to kind of work with us in the future, then please get back to me after this webinar, and I would love to collaborate with more journalists from all across the world, and especially from African countries. So what is my task? My task in this fellowship is to build the tools for investigative reporters, to build things that would help you as journalists do your job in a way that is more based on digital technology, that will include more data-driven approaches, that will include a broader range of information and help you to be more systematic about doing investigative journalism. And this is where this connects to the webinar that we're doing today. So maybe a brief agenda for today. We're going to be looking into digital research tools, and first of all, I want to talk about what I mean when I talk about these types of tools. I want to talk about why I think this is important and how I learned about how crucial it really is to be aware of the technical options that you as an investigative have in terms of conducting your investigation. And I'm going to use a website that we worked on earlier in the year called Yanukovych Leaks as an example. Then we're going to look into some specific technologies that I think might be very useful and easy to get into. And finally, we're going to have a look into the future and think about what are the things that aren't quite there yet and that we would have to look at in the future at building and at developing. And this is also where I'm looking forward to hearing your input, especially thinking about the question, okay, as a journalist, what are the tools that I most miss having that I would really love to have that would make it easier for me to do my job? By the way, the thing on the left-hand side there is actually a bit of US government logo work, very beautiful. Essentially, we're trying to use some of these tools that might also be of use to the Art Intelligence Agency. But before we go into all of this investigative tool stuff, I want to talk a bit about computer literacy. Because quite often when I talk to journalists and when I talk to investigative journalists specifically, I hear this one sentence, which is, "I'm not a computer person." "I'm not a computer person" is a sentence that is true of every living being that I'm aware of. And I want to talk you out of using that sentence as a defense and of using that sentence as something that you put forth in order to not have to engage with technology. I think that basically technology is just a matter of wasting a bit of time so that you can have a massive payoff of time after you figured out how to use a specific tool. So most tools that we're going to talk about right now, I'm not going to be able to explain to you exactly every step that's involved in using them. That takes a bit of doing, but what I'd invite you to do is to spend a bit of time to sit down after the course and think about, okay, where can I apply this in my actual research, and how can I make this work? And then think about, okay, what steps do I need to do in order to make this work for myself? I think that learning these tools just requires a bit of time, a bit of experimentation, a bit of willingness to get into this new thing. And once you've done that, you will get some benefits out of it. When you're saying, I'm not a computer person, I want you to stop doing that and say instead that you're a journalist who's arrived in the 21st century and who's using digital tools in a way that's really kind of helping them to conduct fantastic investigations. But let's go and look at these investigative research tools that we're going to be talking about today. What are they good for? Why do I need them? As a journalist, obviously, your main tool is talking to people. It's being able to ask the right questions of the right people. And that's still true in many ways. But now you can also ask the right questions of the right databases. You can ask the right questions using the right tools. So what we're going to look at is investigating people and companies, because that's what you end up doing most of the time as an investigative journalist. We're going to talk about searching for data on very specific topics. We're going to talk a lot about sifting through sets of documents, whether they're structured or whether they're just things that you have maybe even in a physical filing cabinet somewhere. And eventually, one of the things that we need to think about is understanding data in tables. This is where really data journalism comes in, and the idea of using data as a tool for finding a story and telling the story, telling a story also with data visualization and things like that. So I want to take you back to February. Everybody must be aware that in February there was an uprising in Ukraine, and people were protesting in Kiev against the government of Viktor Yanukovych, and eventually it got pretty bad for him, and he felt compelled to flee the country. And what he left behind was his mansion. He had this estate of, let's say, I think 3 or 4 houses, and a gigantic lake. I think he also had a Spanish galley on it, and all of that kind of became accessible to the public. And a team of investigative journalists went to this estate, and what they found was a lake behind Yanukovych's house that now contained 200 folders of personal documents, all the business dealings of the former president of Ukraine. And whatever your political take is on what happened in Ukraine, that is some really interesting and really fascinating journalistic material. So they went about it. And what happened is they set up this project called Yanukovych Leaks. And Yanukovych Leaks consisted in this team of journalists sitting in the mansion of former President Yanukovych, working through these documents, but also trying to digitize these documents and making them available to everyone in Ukraine and everyone in the world who would be interested in looking through these documents. In order to do this, they looped in an organization called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. They're going to be a recurring player in our presentation today. And the OCCRP helped them to set up a website called yanukovychleaks.org. And they also looped me in, and so I was brought in to help them work through these documents, right? Because the journalists on the ground, they'd started scanning the documents, they'd started photographing some of the documents, but now the question was, how can we make this accessible to everyone? And how can we make this into a journalistic project so that we're not just exposing all these documents, but that we're also really finding out what this president had been doing while he was in office. And so we put up this website, and you can still visit it. But what's really interesting for me as a kind of technologist joining this project is that it raised a number of technical questions that we then had to answer within a very short amount of time. But I think that now, kind of having reflected on the project a bit, I can present you some interesting answers for. So these questions were basically, first of all, how can we digitize the documents? What they had is they had volunteers bring in scanners, which was a really fascinating thing to watch even from afar. How can we share and search these documents? It's not that easy if you have a large number of documents and they've just been photographed to actually make them accessible for example, a full text search. That's, for example, also a problem that the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists faced when they had the offshore leaks leak of text documents last year. They had 250 gigabytes. That's quite a vast amount of data of documents on tax haven companies. But how do you search through such a vast number of documents? Then the next question is, how do we crowdsource analyzing these documents? You've got all these people that are interested in contributing to your journalistic effort, that are out there, that are fascinated by finding out what Yanukovych was up to. How do you let readers contribute their opinions? How do you let them flag documents that might be interesting for you for journalistic investigations? And then the next question becomes, how do we find the mentions of people, of companies, of dates and money, of all the kind of juicy bits of investigative journalism in those documents? How do we find out all the documents that contain references to a particular person or to a particular company? And then there's the kind of the more subtle, higher level thing of, once you've gone through all the documents, of reconstructing an abstract notion of what is actually the system that these documents describe, what is the relationships and the context that is expressed through these documents, and where in these things might we find evidence of corruption, of wrongdoing, of the president maybe using public funds in a way that is irresponsible, the kinds of things that would then make a journalistic story. So all of these questions were kind of raised through Yanukovych leaks, which I thought was an amazing example, therefore, of how these tools become essential to conducting the journalistic work. And I think based on this, I want to take you through a few examples of investigative tools that might be interesting for some of you to look at. The first one is probably the most known and understood at the moment, and it's called Document Cloud. Document Cloud was created by a group of technologists originally from the New York Times after the initial release of WikiLeaks documents. So they found themselves also with a large stash of documents and the need to analyze and understand them. And nowadays, Overview has come to join that, and the Overview project was started by a technologist from the Associated Press, and he basically wanted to build on top of Document Cloud and build more advanced analysis facilities for journalists who may have already digitized and uploaded the documents, but then want to find more subtle patterns inside of these documents. But first, let's have a look at Document Cloud. So this is what Document Cloud looks like when you join it initially. It's basically like a shared folder of documents. You can create different projects for different investigations. You can have access control. That means, access control means that you can define exactly for each project who are the people that should have access to this, so that you can make sure that only the people who really need to see the documents will be able to see the documents. On the other hand, you can also then very easily add new people as the investigation progresses, and you might even want to share documents with someone who is working at a different media organization, especially if you're doing cross-border international reporting. Another thing that you can do using Document Cloud that's really useful is you can go into the documents and put on annotations. So you can see, you can highlight a fragment. You can either put a private annotation, which is for your own investigative work, or you can put on a public annotation, which would then be visible if people were to visit this document. So another thing that you can do that's incredibly useful is you can just embed either a part of a document or the whole document into a news story that you're publishing on the web. So if you're doing a story on the web, what you can do is you can just kind of add a snippet of the document that makes the point that you're trying to make for you, or you can add the whole document at the foot of your text so that people can read the source and convince themselves that what you've been telling them is actually a correct kind of a description of what the document says. So all of these things are kind of included there, and you can also search for documents quite easily. But obviously, there's a bit more complicated cases. So I got this email here a couple of months ago from an investigative reporter, and she said, we're working with 40 gigabytes of documents, and we'd like to search within documents for certain keywords, like something, so we can identify something else. Ideally, we would be able to tag the dogs. And this, to some extent, is also possible with Document Cloud. So, for example, with Document Cloud, what's really fascinating is it looks for what's called entities, so the names of people and companies and organizations within each document that you upload. And you can see here I've uploaded a magazine from South Africa, and you can see where the different articles are about particular companies or where articles mention a particular person. So it gives you a nice way, for example, if you have very long documents, of finding the bits that mention a particular person or company. It's especially useful for court documents and legal documents that go on for 200 pages, but you're really just interested in the interrogation of a witness or something like that. So this is Document Cloud, but maybe you want to do an even more advanced analysis, and then there's this other tool called Overview that I mentioned before. Now, Overview is a bit more of an expert tool, and what happens is if you have an account on Document Cloud, you can import documents from Document Cloud into Overview. And what Overview does is it counts the frequency of particular words in a text. So what it tries to do, and it's a bit hard to see probably at the screen share resolution that we have right now, it tries to make a hierarchy of the terms that are used in particular documents but are not used in other documents. So for example, if you have a massive collection of, let's say, 5,000 documents, and maybe 10% of them mention oil drilling, and another 10% of them mention mining for minerals, then this would kind of try and automatically distinguish these two categories of documents based on the terms that are being used in there frequently and based on the terms that are mentioned in there that are mentioned in a different group of documents. So this is very, very useful in terms of sifting through a large stack of documents and exploring what type of topics are being discussed in different parts of that heap of documents. Again, very useful with court cases and other documents that would take a long time to read, but that you can kind of sift through in this way much more easily. You can also upload what's called CSV files, so essentially spreadsheets, to Overview, so you don't need a Document Cloud account. The thing about Document Cloud accounts is that Document Cloud is managed by the American Association of Investigative Reporters, IRE, and they basically give out accounts. So if you work for a news organization, then you might be able to get an account from IRE. If you can't get an account from IRE, then I would also offer you to visit sourceafrica.net and send me an email. We're running an instance of Document Cloud, the same software, but deployed on a different website. We're running this website, sourceafrica.net, where we're trying to support especially African news organizations who want to have this type of document storage. We're also running this in a secure location so that African governments would not be able to kind of subpoena access to the documents. So this is an offer. If you're interested, email me after this webinar, and we'll get you set up with a fantastic new Document Cloud account so you can play with it. Even if you don't have a serious intention of using it quite yet, just let us know and we'll do that. So that's it for kind of looking at documents at the first stage. And I think these tools are quite powerful even now, but I think over the next year they're going to develop even more. So the Document Cloud has just received a major round of funding, and I think we'll see some exciting features come out of that. The next thing that I wanted to look at, and we talked about this before in terms of looking into companies and people, is two ways of looking at company information. Because often what you're looking at when you're doing investigative journalism is kind of, okay, what is this? Who is this person? What companies? What businesses are they involved in? What are their interests? And some of these websites are now starting to actually provide you with very useful answers. So I want to look at two services. One of them is called opencorporates.com, and the other one is called duedil.com. Duedil as in due diligence. But let's take a little case study. Again, this comes back to the OCCRP that I mentioned before, and they did this fantastic story on money laundering involving the UK, Moldova, and a variety of really complicated setups in order to kind of launder money from the UK. And one guy that was big in there is this guy called Calderbank. So let's try and see what he raises on different company databases. So the first database that I've put his name into is Open Corporates, and you can see straight away that I found 564 different mentions of some person called Damien Calderbank. And what's difficult about this is telling which ones of these are actually the right person, right? There might be more people with this name in the world, If you're looking for someone with a fairly exotic name, like unfortunately my own name, then you have an easy time finding out. Which companies they own. If, for example, you look for John Smith, then you're in deep trouble and you need much more information to determine whether this John Smith is the same as the other John Smith. What you can see, what Open Corporates does quite well is include different jurisdictions. So you can see here that it's found 2 companies in Arkansas in the US, 8 companies in Florida, and down there you've got 538 companies in the UK. So this is kind of a nice way of going through a large set of international business registries and kind of looking at what information might there be out there from all of these different places. Open Corporates also has the advantage that it's run by people who are very interested in the idea of open data and of making sure that this data is freely reusable by those who use it for a non-profit purpose, and I think that journalism kind of falls under that in this case. But let's also look at Due Diligence, which is a startup company that is trying to do similar things. They provide what I feel is a slightly better research tool. So you can see here, for example, immediately the birth date of all the different directors called Damien Calderbank, which is useful in terms of finding out whether that's the same person as the other one. But unfortunately, that only includes a smaller set of company databases. I'm thinking even that it's only the UK company database at the moment, but I think they're trying to expand beyond that now. It's also a startup, so I think at some point we're going to start seeing pricing models being introduced here, at which point it joins a league of very, very good company database lookup services that have fantastic information but are commercial. Some of you might be familiar with, for example, Orbis, which is unbelievably expensive for mere mortals and people who work for small news outlets, but has amazing information. So these are 2 kind of very simple ways of looking at company information. If you're looking for a great research tool, try out Due Dil. If you're looking for a broad range of different countries, try out Open Corporates. If you just go to opencorporates.com, it'll give you a list of all the countries where they have company information. But still, this doesn't cover all the company databases in the world, because there's quite a lot of them, and many of them are actually designed in order to make it hard to access, and some of them are still happening on paper and not on computers, so it's really hard to access this stuff. So what can we do there? And this is where, again, our friends from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project come in, and they started this initiative called the Investigative Dashboard. The Investigative Dashboard has a number of functions, and I want to walk you through 2 of them right now. The first function actually ties in very nicely with what we've been talking about just now with company registries, because what they've done is they've brought together an amazing database of different business registries. So this includes business registries per se, kind of company lists for a wide set of countries, but it also includes government gazettes, which often can be used to find the same information, but in a more accessible form. They have databases on intellectual property, which also contain plenty of information on companies. And they even have a good set of procurement databases, so databases that document where government does business with companies. And again, that's a fantastic source of information about companies. So if you're a journalist working in a particular country, then I, of course, encourage you to go there and look up the databases that they found for your country. But what's even more amazing is that many of your investigations obviously will lead you into different countries. They might lead you into a country where you've never done any journalism before, and then you're completely lost, right? You don't know what kind of what places there might be in terms of looking up a company, in terms of finding out what big companies are, who the directors of a company are, and then this comes in really, really handily. So this is kind of the business registry list on the investigative dashboard. The other thing that I wanted to show you very quickly is even more amazing. So the investigative dashboard people, chief among them Paul Radu, who's one of the heads of the OCCRP, spent a lot of time thinking about how they could make more information accessible to journalists working investigative cases. And what they came up with is this idea of a request tool. So as a journalist, you can sign up for their service, and you can say, well, I'm interested in finding out everything about this particular person. Here I've put up a mock request for Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa. And then what happens is two really cool things can take place. One is that the OCCIP, directly and indirectly, has access to commercial-grade databases, including Orbis and some others, where they will look up these names and find out all the information that would normally cost you a lot of money to get about a particular person and about a particular company. So that's a fantastic way of looking into databases that you, as an individual, would probably never get access to because it's too expensive. The other thing that they have is they have a broad network of researchers who are in particular regions, including Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Arab space. And all of these researchers will go and look at other databases that they might be familiar with. And even better, they will talk to humans. So they might have contacts, they might have stringers on the ground who they can send out and ask to even go into a government office and request a physical stack of documents, scan these documents in, and send them to you. So in a way, this is kind of a superpower. You can activate this network of people who are going to provide you with as much assistance as they can. And that way, I would really encourage you to try out using the Investigative Dashboard as a way of exploring companies and people that are of interest to your investigation. So finally, and this one is a bit different from these large-scale tools, here's something that you can try out on your own computer right now, this afternoon or this morning. It's called Tabular. It's done by a couple of former colleagues of mine. And what they try to figure out is there's so much really good information available in PDF documents. And all of that information in PDF documents is really hard to access if you want to understand it systematically. So for example, you might have statistics in a PDF file, or you might have a list of projects that government has funded, or you might have procurement information or company information, again, in a PDF file. And how do you get that out of a PDF file? That's one of the things where government often releases these PDF files almost intentionally as a way of making sure that it's hard to actually use this information in a journalistic process. And so what Tabular does is it basically helps you to extract tables from PDF files. That sounds very trivial, but it's actually incredibly useful. So after you've downloaded this tool onto your own computer, what you can do is you can just upload, you can just insert a PDF file into the tool, and it will then show you the individual pages of the PDF file, and you can then draw these little selections. As you can see here, there's a grayed out area. You can draw a selection and select all the different parts of this table, and then what happens is almost magic. You get out a table that you could use in a spreadsheet program. So for example, whereas it'd be really hard to find out what is the total amount of population, and this happens to be a list of population figures for Kenyan districts. What is the total population of Kenya? Using this spreadsheet, you could quite easily do a simple formula on the spreadsheet, and then you'd have that information that the PDF itself wouldn't have given to you. So it's a fantastic way of taking some PDF documents that someone has put out and making it more accessible, making it more easy to understand, and doing data journalism on it. So in a way, it's a kind of gateway drug to data journalism. So these 4 tools I just wanted to show to you very quickly. Obviously, there's a lot more tools. So in a moment, I'm going to share with you the link to the website that you're all looking at already, which is a large list of different links to databases, tools, technologies that you can explore. And so looking back at it, why should you use these tools? Well, they help you to find better information, and that basically in itself makes you a better journalist. They help you to access obscure data that you wouldn't have been able to easily access otherwise. And tools like Overview also really help you to recognize patterns, for example, in large sets of documents that you wouldn't have been able to understand just by looking at each individual document. So how can you go about this? The easiest thing to do is just pick one. Pick one of the tools that I talked about just now, or pick one of the tools that are on this website that's linked here. http bit.ly/icfjdigital. Pick one of these tools, try it out in an actual project of yourself of yours. Keep trying, and make it your own, and really make it work for yourself. And I promise you that once you get through it, it'll take a whole lot of work off your chest, and maybe it'll even allow you to do things that you were never able to do before. Make beautiful visual representations of the journalism you've been doing before. Look across borders into other countries and what people that you're interested in have been doing in those countries. All those kinds of actions that you were severely limited on before. So that's a quick overview of the tools. As a final kind of thing, I want to look in the future, and I think there's a couple of things that are beginning to develop, and I would really love your ideas and your input into how we should design these things. So one thing that I think is important is that not only do we use these databases as a way of finding more information and of visualizing it, but also structuring our own process of investigative journalism, so that we create, while we're doing the journalism, we create a database for ourselves, a database of all the things we've already found out, of all the questions we've already been able to answer, of all the people that we've looked into already, that we can then reuse as an asset every time we do another investigation. So that what happens right now doesn't happen again. And what happens right now is that people kind of have this iceberg of information, right? Maybe a small fraction of the information of your story actually makes it into the news report or into the radio feature, television feature. And then all the rest of it basically remains in your head. And if your head is anything like my head, then sooner or later it'll disappear as well. So we need to build this kind of investigative memory for people. And I think that we can build really powerful tools that help you to remind yourself of what you've been looking into previously. And these tools can also begin to be collaborative, so that you can begin to understand what other people have already been looking at, and so that you can share aspects of one of your previous investigations or one of your current investigations with colleagues that might be able to contribute and complement the information that you have. Another thing that we need to start doing more and more is to merge data from many other places, so that all these disparate information sources that become available on the web right now, that they turn into one holistic picture for you of what are the interests of this company, what are the interests of this person, so that you can do you can find out as much about them as quickly as you want to. And it turns out that that's actually the same problem as those previous problems I was describing, of building your own integrated database. And finally, alerts. I think that investigative journalists should have alerts on the people and the companies that they care about, so that they want to. So they can up-to-date when someone creates a new company, or when someone does a business deal, when someone wins a contract with government, that you find an email at 8 o'clock in the morning in your inbox that says, well, hey, this happened, why don't you look into it? Is it maybe a journalistic story? So that's a quick view in the future. If you're interested in those things, again, send me an email or ping me on Twitter after the talk, and I'd be very keen to hear your ideas on what your needs are as investigative journalists. So now I'm going to have a quick look around for the questions that people may have asked. But in the meantime, this again is the link to the website that I'm sharing with you right now. And it has a lot of resources, so I encourage you to spend a bit of time just browsing it and exploring it. Okay, so right now I've got two questions from Jorge Luis. First one is to tell you a bit about the experience that I've had as a Knight Fellow developing digital research tools for investigative journalism. So I've had the incredible pleasure of joining a team of technologists called Code for Africa, and we worked together with this investigative team, NCIR, to develop tools for journalists that might help them to do better investigations. And it's been really interesting for me to see not just kind of what information do you require, but also what is the workflow, what is the process of investigative journalism like, and how can you think about ways that we can tie software into that process, so that you as a journalist have ways of storing the information that you create while you're doing investigative journalism, and of building these information assets. What's hard about this is that I feel investigative journalists often are a bit like cats, right? They're very kind of individualistic beings. They're very much doing their own thing, and any type of structure is rejected. And I think that's awesome because people that do investigative journalism need to question structure. And so that's the kind of struggle that I'm dealing with, is trying to figure out how do we bring together this need for a bit of structured information to be used in investigative journalism and the want of journalists to break through these structures. The other question that I've got is, what skills do you think investigative journalists need to develop? That's a really hard one, and whatever your job requires. I think investigative journalists don't have the luxury of acquiring skills for the skills' sake. They have tasks and they need to accomplish them, and many of these skills are going to be around data processing in the future. I think that in the same way that it's nowadays, it's normal for you as a investigative journalist to use a telephone to call your source. Many of these data tools are going to become as much a second nature to you as using your telephone. I think the minimum for you to understand and to use is to understand a bit about spreadsheets, to have a good working knowledge of how to do simple analysis of a data set in a spreadsheet. Another thing that I think it's really useful for you to understand is how to do really good and advanced searches, maybe even just using Google, but also using many of the databases that I've linked to you on this page. So that you are more effective at finding information on the web than you would be just by typing 1 or 2 words into a Google field. And finally, I think that investigative journalists need to understand all the different places where they can find extremely specialized information on the web. So the web is incredibly becoming this massive archive of data. And there are all these websites, and I've linked to some down here, have very, very specific data. So for example, there are a lot of websites that collect court cases, or that collect information about extractive industries, oil and minerals companies, that collect information about development finance and how that money is being spent in the recipient countries, or that contain information about land grabbing. And so whatever your particular view on investigative journalism is, what topics you're looking into, you will need to understand what are the databases in my specific area, and how do I best use them, and how do I make sense of the data that's being offered there. Do we have any other questions? I can't see any further questions right now. I've added more. Okay, sorry. We've got this slight delay here. Okay, so I've got a question here, which is there a place where journalists who are beginners can get help using these tools? And is there a simple how-to that's available online? So there's a number of things. One is there's a lot of training courses online that I would recommend you have a look at. And the other one is that it's really useful to connect to a community, that they connect to a community of like-minded journalists, of people who are trying to do similar things. So in terms of the resources and the training materials that are online, I would recommend that you look at the Data Journalism Handbook that I've linked here, as well as the Data Journalism course. The Data Journalism course is a massively online training course where you can find nice videos prepared by presenters and that explain how to use different bits of data journalism and investigative tools. Another resource that it's worth looking at is the Geojournalism Handbook. That contains a lot of kind of introductory articles on individual tools. But then even more important, I think, than reading these materials is that you connect to a community of people who are interested in doing this thing as well. So one of the communities that I'm most fond of is called the School of Data. And the School of Data basically brings together people both from journalism and from activism who are trying to wrap their minds around data. And you can sign up to their mailing list, you can join their online courses. They've got quite a lot tutorial texts online as well. And it's a fantastic place to meet people who are very like-minded and who are also starting out in this. The other place that's really worth looking at is NICAR. So NICAR-L is a mailing list run by journalists in the United States. It's run by the IRE, the Association of Investigative Reporters. And it has a lot of emails going over it where people just kind of get started with data journalism. They're looking for the right tools to use. They're looking for help on how to use these tools. And it's really interesting to follow up and to see what people are getting up to. So that's a fantastic place as well. It is, though, a bit US-centric. So most of the people on this list are from the United States. So if you're interested in something with a bit of a more global kind of community on it, then I would recommend that you look into this data-driven journalism list that's run by the European Journalism Center and the Open Knowledge Foundation. So these are three communities that I would really recommend that if you're interested in getting started with data tools and with research tools like this, you could join and collaborate with. So that's maybe a good way of approaching this. The next question that I have is, you suggest sharing data with others. Can you explain how that can happen? I've heard about hacks and ways to go and do that. So Hacks and Hackers, I don't know who's familiar with it. Hacks and Hackers is a fantastic place to. Oh, I've missed out on something on the previous point, which is horribly embarrassing in terms of resources and communities. One community that I assume many of you are already familiar with because you're in this webinar is IJNet. And IJNet is a fantastic set of online articles, how-tos, practices operated by the International Center for Journalists. It's at ijnet.org. Sorry, but going back to Hacks and Hackers, Hacks and Hackers is a fantastic opportunity for you to meet technologists. So some of these tasks that I've explained to you are not yet really covered by tools entirely, right? So you might have a problem where, for example, you need to scrape information off the web, which means kind of downloading databases from the internet that don't want to be downloaded. And for those types of tasks, you will sooner or later need a technologist to work with you. And Hacks and Hackers is just that. It's a dating pool essentially for journalists who are interested in learning more about technology, and also technologists who are interested in learning more about journalism. And there's plenty of them because journalism is a really interesting thing to look into, and there are fascinating data problems that you guys have, and that technologists might want to solve for you. So many cities worldwide have these Hacks and Hackers meetups. I would recommend that if you live in or near a city that has a Hacks and Hackers community, just go there for an evening. Normally, there's a talk or two to introduce you to something, and then you will you'll be looped into a conversation, and you'll maybe make some new friends that could be very useful. So I've got another question here, which is, do I listen to Serial, and what do I think of the investigative techniques that Sarah Koenig is employing? And I have to admit here that I haven't yet, so I'm still hoping to catch up with it, but I've been fairly busy over the past couple of weeks. If any of you are interested in that, then I'd be more than happy to learn about what's happening in that show. So, do we have any other questions? I think right now that's it. I've got one more question here that's just popped up. Could you elaborate more about managing evidence in investigative journalism? The question of evidence is kind of hard, right? So you have this notion that as journalists, often you try to find these tools that will help you to manage all the material that you're collecting while you're in an investigation. Let's say you put a lot of documents on Dropbox. Don't put them on Dropbox. Dropbox is not a very safe place to store your documents. Or you have maybe a Word document where you put all your notes. The question is, how can we make that information more consistent, and how can we make sure that each piece of information that you collect is properly attributed to a source? And I think that's something that that would be very interesting to make tools on. In fact, we were working on software that would help and support that process, so that you as a journalist could have a more systematic way of storing information about the facts that you found over the course of an investigation, that you could store where this information is coming from, etc., etc. In fact, we've started working on a piece of software that maybe I can call up very quickly, which is called. This is live demos during webinars. Something has to go wrong. But basically, imagine you're writing a story like this one, which is about corruption in Kenya. And instead of just kind of writing your story like you would in a text editor, what you can do here is you can have the different people, companies, organizations that are mentioned in this story pointed out to you. And you can, for example, click on one of these, and you can see, okay, this is a part of the Kenyan government. And here's all the government tenders that they've made recently. Or you can look at a particular person and you can see, well, these are the companies that they might be involved in. And so you can also obviously make your own notes and say, well, this person, I spoke to him on the telephone, etc., etc. So it becomes a place for you to create some structured knowledge about what you know about people and where you know it from. And I think that's something that's really powerful. There is, in fact, already something called story-based inquiry, which is an investigative technique that basically uses spreadsheets to accomplish many of these same things. But I think that if you put it into a software tool where it can connect to open data sources, it becomes that much more powerful. So the final question that I've just seen popping up here is about open spending and how to use that as a digital tool for investigative journalism. So before joining ICFJ, I worked for Open Knowledge, the Open Knowledge Foundation, and helped to create a platform called openspending.org. Openspending.org is a website that is, I think, the largest archive of public finance information in the world. We have 73 countries represented in our database, almost 1,000 different budget data sets. And what this includes, one is country budget, so you can see how much is being allocated to health as compared to education, compared to defense. And you can even go down there and see how much is being allocated to primary education, secondary education, tertiary education, how has that changed over time, and all that kind of details. So that's a really fantastic thing, and basically everybody can go there and upload a budget data set if they've got a spreadsheet that contains the necessary information. Again, a tool like Tabular comes incredibly handy in here, because many governments only publish information as PDF documents, which you can't make these types of visualizations out of. So what this comes down to is, where does mymoneygo.org, for example, my money, I'm obviously mistyping here, which is based on open spending and presents the data about, for example, in this case, the British budget in a lot of detail and with a nice way to explore how the government is spending money, not just in terms of the sectors, but also geographically. I don't know why London fell off here. The other thing that open spending contains that is kind of worth pointing out very quickly is it contains a large stash of what's called transactional spending information. So this is information about individual contracts that governments all over the world, whether it's Australia, the US, the UK, have made, and basically we're documenting the individual payments. And that's a fantastic place, for example, if you look for Siemens, my favorite companies as a German. Then it would go and it would look through all the kind of different contracts, whether they're from Germany, whether they're from UK, from any number of other countries. And I can see that what kind of payments Siemens has been receiving all over the world in terms of government contracts. And that's a fascinating resource, especially if you're looking into companies that are known for doing things that might be questionable. So, for example, we did a collaborative project with Privacy International, looking into companies that sell surveillance technology. And we looked up all the different companies that sell surveillance technology, and we found quite a lot of them selling arbitrarily large things to small fire stations in rural Australia. So that's a fantastic way of generating a story here. So, do we have any further questions? Okay, I've got one more question here, which is about a tool that I've been working on, and I want to show you the website very quickly here. It's called Grano. It's named after a scientist who in 1973 wrote a paper called The Strength of Weak Ties, Mark Granovetter. And he started off this whole question of basically understanding power structures in society by understanding them of networks between people, companies, etc., etc. And so I'm very interested in this question of mapping out influence structures by mapping out connections between people, between companies, etc. To show you a practical example of that, we've started a project in South Africa called Siyazana, which is a, I think, Zulu word that means we know each other. And Siyazana basically contains information about all members of parliament in South Africa. And what we've done is we've looked up all of their company holdings, all of the NGOs and non-profits that they're associated with, and all of the political committees that they're associated with. And our goal is essentially also to bring in procurement information so that we could ask questions such as, well, here's a procurement committee. It contains these 3 politicians. Do any of them have any political interests in the outcome? Sorry, do any of them have any economic interest in the outcome of that procurement decision? Do they have maybe direct interest in one of the companies? Do they have a family member or a spouse who's got a business interest in one of the companies? And basically, we're trying to map out the different connectivities between people who are in political positions of power and people who are in positions of economic power, or who are in a position where they would benefit from economic wealth that's created from government. So here, for example, there's a politician, member of parliament. You can see that he's associated with the African National Congress. I've just picked him by random. You can see some basic information about them, but then you can also see all the different companies in which they are registered as a director, and you can also see the companies that they themselves have stated on their parliamentary declarations, as well as memberships in other organizations such as committees in the parliament. So this is one way that we're trying to create data that would be useful for investigative journalists as a resource during their research while they're writing a story. So I think with this we're going to wrap it up, and I thank all of you who've attended this webinar. I hope that you've picked up some useful ideas. I think the most important idea that I was trying to communicate to all of you was this notion that pick one of these tools and make it your own, right? Just pick one of them that might solve a problem for you. Try, use it, and don't give up, and then you'll have an amazing new skill that will help you to do better investigative journalism. So thank you again very much, and let's stay in touch. My Twitter account is Pudo, P-U-D-O. And if you want to send me an email, then you can send it to Friedrich, any spelling is okay, at pudo.org. That's Friedrich at pudo.org. So thanks again, and I hope to hear from many of you. Bye-bye.